Not only are mistakes not something to be feared, mistakes are things to be ran at like a big old chocolate cake. Certainly the people that have achieved the most have made far more mistakes than those who haven't achieved that much. It takes lots of mistakes to do something better. And in the process of doing so much art where I'm not concerned about the outcome, I found that I do improve in areas where I wouldn't otherwise because I'd be toiling too hard to make that happen. So I think that art is kind of like a meditation for me now that I do every day that reminds me, like, don't overthink what you're doing. Just let go, let the thing happen, and the results will be something idiosyncratic and wonderful. Let it happen. And this doesn't just apply to art, it also applies to cooking, which can also be a disaster sometimes. And also interpersonal relationships. Like, people will get into their heads so much that they kind of ruin the dynamic they have with someone. But if you can just be in the moment that you're in, enjoy being with the person you're with at that time, it's a much more human interaction. And I think art has kind of taught me that. My name is Marc-Anthony Macon. I just pull a bunch of random words out of the air to describe which kind of artist I am on any given day, because who the hell knows? My name is Marc-Anthony Macon. I am a collage artist in the quasi-neo-Dadaist absurdist style. My name is Marc-Anthony Macon, and I'm a tax accountant. I grew up in a household where, I mean, my father is kind of he defined himself at that time when I was really young, around 5 or so, as a bit of a shaman, machinist, sculptor. So I kind of grew up around creativity. That was really a major part of my life. My dad was always making something and creating something, and he had, you know, sort of a MacGyver-like lack of functional fixedness. Any object he found, he could make into something else. So as a kid, for example, we were supposed to make puppets to make the little billy goat's gruff in kindergarten, and all the other kids just made something out of a sock or a paper bag, and my dad and I slaughtered my Cookie Monster stuffed animal and made this big, furry, giant billy goat out of that. So I was always doing something weirder and more ostentatious, creative-wise, as a kid, usually with my dad. And then my mom was a biochemist at the time, so I spent half the time doing crazy things with my dad in the garage and half the time in a biochemistry lab moving the gels. So I kind of had this science and art thing from a very young age. I spent a lot of time at museums, and one day I was at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City, and if you've ever been there, there's always this guy there. It's not the same guy, but it's the same guy who will be standing in front of the Jackson Pollock, big Jackson Pollock piece, and he'll just kind of go, well, I could do that, why ain't I a rich artist? And, you know, I heard this guy say that, and I was annoyed. And I just kind of, in the back of my head, I was like, well, you didn't do that, buddy. I don't know if you could do that. I don't think I could do that. And I just kind of stewed about it. And then on the trip home, I just was thinking it over and over in my head, and I was like, well, I'm gonna do that. Why not do that? Let's see what happens. So I grabbed a bunch of magazines when I got home, I ripped them up, I glued them together in different configurations, I splattered paint on them, I put stickers on them and duct tape and signed them and sat back and said, oh, I've got 50 or 60 pieces of art. And the next day I made another 50 and I was like, now I've got 100 pieces of art in 2 days. Let's see if I can make it 500. And so by the time I had 500, I thought this was hilarious. It was just the funniest thing that I had ever done. The more I had, the funnier it was to me. And I felt really free because I was intentionally not trying to make them look good. I was just intuitively throwing things together, and it was fine if it was bad, and in fact, it might be preferable if it was bad. So over the course of a couple of years, I got about 4,000 pieces done. And around this time, I read that Pablo Picasso, that wife-beating potato, had made about 4,500 pieces in his life. And I was like, I'm gonna beat him. I am totally going to beat Picasso like an egg. And, you know, maybe he has me beat in terms of quality. He definitely has me beat in terms of quality. But I am going to beat him in terms of quantity, and there's nothing you can do about it. You're dead, Pablo. What are you gonna do? So within a year of discovering that, I quickly eclipsed how many pieces Picasso has made. I've got about 6,000 now, and this is really just kind of the way I work. It's what can I do to make more pieces? Not better pieces, just more. I haven't run out of space to store them yet. So really every month I kind of sit down with myself and say, all right, where can you cut some more corners? What can you be more lazy about? What can be more sloppy? What can you do without thinking because you're thinking too much about the art? So I'm always trying to dumb it down as much as I can. And that was really the genesis of the eggs. It was, if I'm gonna beat Picasso fast, I need to make a bunch of pieces really quickly. I have all these New Yorkers, I'm just gonna draw a goddamn egg on every page and then he's beaten. And that's what I really did, is made hundreds and hundreds of eggs until I beat Picasso. And I hope he enjoyed that beating. I spent a lot of time at Cafe Paradiso and really got to know everyone that worked there and the owners. And as baristas were graduating or moving on with their lives and leaving, I would just kind of do a portrait of them as a goodbye. And after I had a couple of dozen of these, because years had passed and there'd been a cycle of baristas, we had a exhibition there of just people that were former employees at Paradiso. So really that wasn't so much a wanting to have an art show as it was wanting to show appreciation for these specific people that I cared about. But that was the first exposure where I realized, oh, I could hang this stuff on the walls and people might want to look at it. And from there, just different opportunities started cropping up. The most surprising one would be, I got an email from a woman in Korea saying, I really like your eggs. I run a cafe and like to hang some of these up in the cafe. How much are they? And so I sent her some prices and she bought 10 of them and I sent her a dozen. I thought that would be, might as well give a dozen eggs. And asked if she could please send photos of them hanging up because I wanted to see them in the cafe. So a couple of months later, she sends me photos and all the eggs were hanging up over the hot dog bar, which I think is definitely the place of honor in any cafe. Over the hot dog bar is where you want to go. I saw Over the Hot Dog Bar open for Marilyn Manson once, and they were great. Matt Cho, who owns Broadway Food Hall, had asked for the collab if I could do a boneyard show there. And he wanted to do all eggs and then have eggs all over the shipyard walls too. So I already had hundreds of eggs because I was beating Picasso. So I just framed all of those and we just covered collab with eggs, and I then spent a few hours tagging eggs all over the shipyard, which I still do every few months just to make sure that they don't all get covered up. And he had just, I think, gotten the space for Broadway Food Hall and discovered a bunch of old blueprints there, including these huge, I think it was 1972 blueprints for Kentucky Fried Chicken. And so I just still remember him saying, hey, look at these. Do you want to put egg on those? And I was like, so I drew eggs all over those and they hung up at the collab show. But now they're at Broadway Food Hall, which was a surprise to me. So when it opened and I walked in for the first time, I was just kind of checking out the new place and I was like, oh, there's my eggs. And it was a really pleasant surprise, and still, I dig going in there, just having some coffee and an egg sandwich with my own eggs. I'm sure there are other people that work the way that I do, but I haven't met any of them yet or read about them. Most artists that I know will work on maybe one piece at a time, or they'll have 5 to 10 pieces that they're kind of gradually working on in different settings or at different times. I've got about 100 pieces that are in big stacks, and each of these stacks is a different level of completeness that feeds into one stack. So I have stacks and stacks of materials that I draw from, and every time I complete a piece, I will draw from the next stack. But basically there's a stack of 100 of them, and each session, which I'll usually paint for about 2 to 5 hours at a time, depending on how much free time and how much light I have, because I usually use natural light. I will do one change on each piece, maybe 30 seconds to a minute and a half at the most, put that on the drying rack, do the next piece. I go through all of them until I'm done, and then stack them all back up again so that all of the newer ones are on the bottom, and then I just keep going like that. And every time one is finished, I will put it on the scanner to get ready to scan it and add another fresh one to the batch. So I'm never thinking about any particular piece at a given time. I'm never really working on one for an extended period of time directly, although there have been some that will stay in that stack for as long as a year. I just keep adding things to them, and then eventually they become done. Sometimes it only takes 3 or 4 passes before they're done. It really just depends on what the materials are and what they're saying to me and whether or not I've giggled yet. For me, I think the best moments as an artist are when I've finished a work and I'm showing that either in person or online, and another artist whose work I really admire says that they like it. So, I mean, even in terms of just social media, I think anyone that does art and puts it on social media really appreciates if they're getting likes and hearts and things and people are showing that they like it. But if T. Marie Nolan likes one of my pieces, and she's an outsider artist from Missouri, I feel really good about that piece. Also, Matt Kish is a big influence of mine, and he's the guy that did one piece for every page of Moby Dick, a couple of which I've got hanging up here. And anytime he likes one of my pieces, I'm like, yeah, I'm winning with this one. So, you know, I guess I have to admit that while my process is about not caring, once it's done, these are my children, and I kind of care about, you know, how they're treated and who likes them. And I especially love it when someone that I think is very talented likes what I'm doing. You can really care about your art after it's done. Save the caring for when you're finished. Until you're finished, do not care about what you're making. Just let it come through you. And in fact, try to make mistakes, because the better you get at making those mistakes, the better you can correct them later. And more importantly than anything, I think, is just have fun doing what you're doing. That fun will show through what you're doing. So worrying about technical skill, yes, that's something that you need to do. You need to practice certain skills for hours a day if you want to get better at those particular skills. But when you're sitting down to make a piece, let it be as free as it possibly can. And also, I think going along with that is not worrying about perceived perception or reception of what you've got really goes a long way, because it allows you to be fully you as much as you possibly can. And the only way that your art can do anything valuable is if it's from your specific perspective, if it's something people could get from no one else. And I think the more you are trying to emulate other things, the more you are trying to improve in a specific direction with really hard intent, the more you're not going to be doing something that's wholly original, the more it doesn't really come from you. And I think we need a lot more voices that are genuine and sincere, and not just, it's okay that they're weird, it's great that they're weird. The weirder the better. Art needs to be weird and dangerous.
To get involved and support the Urbana Public Arts program, please contact the Public Arts Coordinator Rachel Storm at rlstorm@urbanaillinois.us or 217-328-8265.